Good morning and welcome to the latest Backing Brentwood Business webinar brought to you by Brentwood Chamber of Commerce, Brentwood Borough Council and Brentwood Business Partnership. My name's Colin Barber and I'm the Chairman of Brentwood Chamber of Commerce, and it's my pleasure to host today's webinar, which is part of a series of webinars entitled Backing Brentwood Business, focused on helping you, the business people of Brentwood, to cope with the current problems associated with the coronavirus, and also to help you come through it in a more profitable and successful way, hopefully. As I say, this is part of a series of webinars, and all the webinars which we've run so far are available on the Brentwood Chamber of Commerce YouTube channel. So if you'd like to search for them, then do feel free to do so. And we are, of course, recording today's webinar as well. Our guest presenter today is Veronica Sadowsky from Carers First, and we'll be talking to her in a very short period of time. But just before that, just like to welcome all of you today and to thank you very much for joining us, and hope you enjoyed today's webinar and find it useful and informative. A couple of points to mention to you. If you're not familiar with Zoom, then there are a few buttons at the bottom of your screen, the most important one being the Q&A button. So if you have any questions for Veronica about managing carers at work, or if you are a carer and you're working currently, then do feel free to send her a question. Just hit the Q&A button, type in your question, and I'll ask them of Veronica at the end of a presentation. And as I say, it is being recorded, so if you know anyone else who might be interested in the presentation, then do tell them about it, and it will be available to view probably later on today on our YouTube channel. So I'd like to thank Veronica for joining us today. Are you there, Veronica? You'd just like to unmute?
I am indeed, Colin, yes.
Good. Okay, you're very welcome and good to see you. And you're from Carers First. First of all, one of the reasons why we're running the webinar this week is because I understand it's National Carers Week this week. Would you like to just tell us a little bit first of all about National Carers Week?
That's right, Colin. So every year, Carers UK, which is one of the really big national charities that lobbies for unpaid carers, does a lot of work with government around kind of policy going forward and legislation. They run a Carers Week, and it's two things really. It's kind of to celebrate all the hard work that the unpaid carers put in, and it's also obviously to promote awareness. And very interestingly, I was just watching BBC Breakfast News about an hour ago, and there was a slot about Carers Week. And there was a piece of research from Carers UK, which they've just released today, which says that they estimate that up to 4.5 million extra people are now taking on a caring role during the COVID-19 pandemic. And that might be due to COVID-19, but it might equally be because the lockdown has meant that lots of services that people normally use, whether they be day centres or care workers coming into the home, haven't been able to function. And so family members have sort of stepped into the breach and done lots of things that they weren't doing before. So this feels like a really timely webinar. Yeah,
so 4.5 million is a massive increase, presumably on the amount of carers there were before. And
it is.
As you say, some of them may be temporary carers, but it may well turn out that some of them do end up being permanent carers for whatever reason. Yeah. And Carers First, is that that's obviously based locally? Is it a national organisation? Are you a part of a national organisation, or are you just a one-off local organisation?
So Carers First is a charity that originated in Kent in 1991 as a sort of local carer centre, which quite a lot of carers charities did. And then we work in a number of localities. Essex is one, Lincolnshire's another. We've got 4 London boroughs that we support carers in. So we've been working in Essex since April 2018, and we're what's called commissioned. So we're kind of funded under a contract with Essex County Council.
Okay, and what about yourself? How long have you been with Carers First?
So I've been with Carers First since the start of this contract, so a couple of years. I've probably worked with carers, in and around carers, since around 2005. So I've had a few employers in that time, but I'm absolutely passionate about the subject. I've worked in hospitals, I've worked in the community, different settings, different locations. So absolutely love it.
Yeah. And this may sound like a simple question, but could you give me a sort of very quick definition of what a carer is? How does someone define as being a carer? What does that actually mean?
So lots of definitions fly about, but it's really about somebody who supports. It's usually a family member, a partner, but it could equally be a friend or a neighbour, And it's somebody who really couldn't manage without the help that the unpaid carer gives. It's not about living with somebody, it's not about getting a benefit for them, and it's not necessarily about being in touch with social care or any of those things. It's really about, does what you do to help this other person, and you do it through choice, have an impact on you? And that could be your physical health, your mental health, it could be how you can go to work, it can be what you can do in your spare time, it can be financially. So if it impacts on you, then really you are a carer. People are obviously struggling sometimes to identify themselves as that. So the gentleman on Breakfast News absolutely said, I see myself as a husband and a dad. I've really struggled to see myself as a carer. And that's a message we hear lots and lots and lots of times. So one of the hardest things is getting people to actually recognise that they're in that situation.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So even, for example, someone maybe if you pop across the road every morning to check if your neighbour's okay, would that sort of classify you as a carer?
Absolutely, because if that neighbour would need lots more support, if you weren't popping across the road to check on them and make sure they've taken the milk in and they haven't fallen over in the night and things, they might need to have somebody coming in from a care agency. And clearly there's a cost to that, either for the neighbour, for society as a whole, through kind of our council tax with Essex County Council. So all those things impact on you, but that person is very unlikely to think, you know, I've got a caring responsibility. But at the same time, they're probably panic stricken if they go away on holiday for a week.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
it does impact on them.
Yeah. And has the number of carers grown over the years? Is it something which existed 20, 30 years ago, or has it changed due to the change in the way that we run our health service and the way we run our social care? Or?
I mean, I think obviously people have always been in a caring role because we've always had people with different health issues, you know, over centuries. But clearly our life expectancy and the demographic of the population is quite a big impact. So you get a lot more older carers and you get people living independently in their own homes for, you know, decades more than you would have expected even sort of 30, 40 years ago. And yes, the growth is terrific. So
yeah,
we'll come back to that in some of the slides, I think.
Yeah. Okay, good. So as you said, you've got a PowerPoint presentation which you're going to run through with us. So I'm just going to start that now and run the slides through for you. So let me just do a quick screen share. So yeah, over to you, Veronica, if you'd like to talk us through the slides, and I'll click through them as and when.
Lovely, thanks very much, Colin. So the first slide is just to let employers know really that there is a scheme that Carers UK run called Employers for Carers, and that's very much about trying to get carer-friendly practices into the workplace. Because it's a national scheme, it's really aimed quite a lot at bigger organisations. But for smaller organisations like chamber members, it may be that they can access some of those resources that are available through maybe one of their suppliers or somebody that they actually do business with, because a lot of the bigger organisations, whether it's Sainsbury's or HSBC, large councils, that kind of thing, they're quite frequently members of Employers for Carers, and there's some good resources available. So if people are interested, you know, we can talk to them separately about who they might be able to access that through. So so our first slide after this is basically talking about some of the situations we discussed in our introduction, Colin. How would we define a carer? There's lots of definitions out there, but as I said, I think it's really about, do you support somebody who would really struggle without your help? And it may be that you look after more than one person, and it may be that you look after a child, it may be that you look after a partner, it may be that you look after an older person, it may be that you support somebody that lives 100 miles away but end up driving up there a lot of times at the weekends. So every carer's story is different and every carer's journey is different. Some people are, you know, thrown into it at the deep end. Some people, it builds up very gradually over a long period of time. And some people have that experience lots of times in their lives with kind of lots of different family members. So it is completely different for everybody. But the main thing is to recognise that there are a lot of carers out there, and that we ourselves are quite likely to have that experience as we go through life. And I think then we were talking about facts and figures earlier, and how there's such a big growth. So some of the facts and figures around carers are a bit scary when you look at them. The last census in Essex, which was obviously 2011, so nearly 10 years ago, identified 146,000 carers in the county. That's only the people who actually thought they were a carer, and it's nearly 10 years out of date. So the real number is probably in excess of 200,000 people. And we don't know what percentage might be working carers, but it's quite fair to assume that it's probably in proportion to the population. So there'll be a percentage who are young carers under the age of 18, and there'll be a percentage of people who are 60, 65 plus, who probably would have retired from the labour market. But there's also a lot of people who are of working age and still trying to carry out a caring role. It's quite interesting because we were looking at something in our own organisation this week. Because it's Carers Week, we thought we'd have a look at the staff. And we're reckoning that amongst the Carers First staff nationally, it's about 130 people. We think there's somewhere between a quarter and a third of them who actually have a caring role. Sometimes for partners, sometimes for children, sometimes for elderly parents, sometimes for another family member. So 3 in 5 of us at some point in our lives will have the experience of being a carer. And some of us will have that experience repeatedly, as I said. So it's not something we could ignore as a society, and it's not something that businesses can afford to ignore, because it's very unlikely that none of your staff or yourself will ever find yourself in that situation. So I wonder if we could have a look at carers' rights now. Yeah, that's some facts and figures. Gosh, 4.27 million working carers. And that's without the 4.5 that we just mentioned that have been newly identified by Carers UK. So that is a lot of people. So carers have certain rights as employees, as do lots of other groups of employees. And some of these tie in to things like the Equalities Act, where people have rights around kind of pregnancy and maternity and parental leave. So quite a lot of the rights are shared with other groups of employees, and you'll probably be familiar with some of these. So the right to request flexible working, and clearly it is a right, it's to request, it's not an obligation for it to be given. And I think it's about people having an open and honest conversation really about what would, what wouldn't, and what might work for the business, and what would, wouldn't, or might work for that particular employee, because it's going to be different for different sectors of business. So some people can obviously adapt much more to things around flexible hours, job sharing, you know, term time working, all sorts of things. It's much easier perhaps in an office environment than it is in a retail sector or a hospitality sector. But it's worth having those conversations. And part of it is really about making the employee feel that you are trying to support them. And if they recognise that you're doing your best, and that some things may be deliverable as an employer and some things won't, then I think that's probably the approach that employers really want to go for. A right to time off and a right to time off in emergencies, and obviously we all have emergencies. I had one yesterday with my 90-year-old parents. So it happens to all of us. Obviously, it's a matter of company policy as to whether people have that time paid, whether they have that time unpaid, you know, whether you have any kind of dependency leave, whether you have, you know, any opportunity for people to use annual leave, whether people ever build up any loo time, flexi time, and that's going to depend from employer to employer. But it is really, again, about having those honest conversations with people about, in our case, it's about service delivery, but it's also about supporting our staff who are in a caring role in order to support other people who are in a caring role. Parental leave and shared parental leave, obviously that's a legislative obligation, and protection from discrimination, as again lots of groups have, that you can't be discriminated against because you have a caring role, through all of the processes from recruitment to redundancy and everything in between. But I would stress it's really about conversations, and when we're talking to carers, we always encourage people to try and have an honest conversation with their employer, rather than get to a point where they're saying, I can't do this anymore, I'm going to have to leave, or I'm going to have to look for a different job, or fewer hours, or something that's closer to home, when they haven't even had a conversation with their employer about the fact they've got a caring role. So sometimes people are very loath to kind of disclose their personal circumstances, but really you're not giving the employer a chance if you don't have that conversation. So if we talk about now the benefits to employers of supporting their staff when they have got carers, there are many benefits, and they can really be grouped into a number of themes. Clearly it makes good business sense, because it can be quite difficult, especially somewhere like Brentwood and other parts of Essex, to attract staff. You're quite close to London, there's not a very high unemployment rate, so to first of all attract staff and retain staff, and good staff, can be quite challenging. So if you can support them to kind of juggle a caring role and their career, and their work opportunities, then clearly that's good for you as an employer. If they feel comfortable and confident to have a conversation with you, then it will obviously enhance the employees' well-being, their mental well-being, and how they are day to day with their colleagues, with clients, with their workload. That's better for them, and it's better for the business as well. It actually has a legislative focus as well. I've talked about the Equality Act, and there are certain things that you need to do, but I would hope that a lot of employers would also want to do them. We've put on there as well about social responsibility and your brand reputation, and that's about being seen as a really positive force in your local community, I think. And at the bottom, a very obvious one, reduces sick leave, and unplanned leave. If people are able to kind of work more flexibly, they're less likely to phone up and say, I'm off sick today, when they're not actually sick but they need the time, or I need tomorrow off as annual leave and I'm sorry I didn't give you more notice, and that can be quite difficult. So that flexibility kind of works for everybody. So if we just have a look at how employers might be able to help the staff. Flexible working practices, there are lots and lots of options depending again on what sector you're in. Some work better than others. Whether you want to allow people to have any dependency leave. In our own organisation we do have the opportunity to use that if we need to, and several staff do, have done recently that I can think of, and it's been massively helpful for those staff, but it's also been helpful for the organisation because we know that when they come back they'll have kind of dealt with the issue that caused them to need that time off, and then they can come back raring to go and fully focused. Management, it's around kind of workplace culture, if people need training around how to manage staff, if colleagues need training, and in bigger organisations obviously there you can have things around carers champions, you can have carers passports that sit with the HR department. So within Carers First we have carers passports which the staff have an option to fill in and just log with their line manager and with HR, and then if somebody is on holiday or off sick, or if there's a vacancy, they don't need to have to keep revisiting all their circumstances because it's already in their passport. Policy and procedure, it's good to think about policies before you find yourself in a position where you wish you had one. So sometimes it's just about thinking, do I need to get something down on a sheet of A4 just to say, as an employer, these are my thoughts about how I'd support carers, and it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. There are lots of templates and things out there that you know, people can source quite easily. Practical support, you know, is it okay if people leave their mobile phones on, if they have them on vibrate, or if they have them, you know, on something that is not hopefully going to disrupt everybody, but maybe people find it very stressful if they're asked to go and lock their mobile phone away in a locker for 8 hours. Is it okay if they go and make some calls in their lunch hour to sort out mum's medical appointments and those kind of things? In some of the bigger organisations, they actually have networking groups. So, for instance, within Essex County Council, they have a forum for carers. So people who work within the council in all sorts of different directorates meet up once a quarter in their locality, and they also do some kind of virtual ones across the whole council, and just kind of share experiences and tips, and that's facilitated by HR, and people find that really helpful. Obviously works in a bigger organisation, you wouldn't need that in a smaller one, but it's an option. And flexible benefits, you know, could be childcare vouchers, could be healthcare insurance, could be all sorts of things. So there are a lot of things. I think there are a couple more that are going to come up around car parking and so on, but care awareness training, as we talked about, and that could actually be opened out to your clients. It doesn't just have to be for the people within your organisation. So there are lots of things that employers can do that are no cost, low cost, don't require an enormous amount of time, but might make a big difference to your staff and to your reputation. So if we have just to look at some top tips there, just to really summarise what we've talked about, be open and clear about your practices, encourage the staff to use them, get to know the staff, try to be flexible. It's not always possible, and I think everyone appreciates that. Great to be approachable on all aspects, not just about carers, obviously, but if you can let the staff find out about policies and things that are outside work, I think that's a great one there. Lead by example. Managers also need to achieve work-life balance, and encourage your staff to seek support if they feel that's a road they want to go down. So those are our top tips. And when we go on to the last slide, you'll just see how people could get in contact with Carers First. So we cover the whole of Essex, clearly cover the Brentwood area, and people can refer themselves, so they don't need to be referred by a GP or a social worker, anybody like that. People are more than welcome to phone up and have a conversation, drop us an email. If they want to register with us for ongoing support, they can, but we don't expect that everyone wants to register. Some people just have some queries, and that's absolutely fine. All the services are free and the services are confidential. I think there might be one more slide of the contact, but that's about it from me. So thank you very much, Colin.
Great. Okay. Thanks very much, Veronica. And let me just stop the screen share there. So yeah, it was very interesting, very informative, and something I think I learned a bit. So just to clarify, just picking up on that last slide, you provide support to both employers and employees, is that correct? So someone could, if they're a carer or if they're an employer.
Absolutely. So we have obviously a number of kind of targets, for want of a better word, set for us by Essex County Council as part of our contract. So the vast bulk of our work is supporting individual carers. So people contact us, they might just want some information and they're quite happy to go off and kind of make phone calls and fill forms in, or people might be looking for ongoing support. So they might be looking to come to a group or to join an online forum. They might be wanting to be referred onto some third-party groups. So they might be struggling to find out about a condition that the person they look after suffers from, and is there any local support. So we can talk to them about a whole range of issues, from, you know, benefits to social services to what could you talk to the GP about, to all sorts of things. But one of our other targets is around working with employers across Essex, because Essex County Council recognise that there's an awful lot of carers in the population, in the community, and as we said, a large proportion of those carers are actually trying to work at the same time. So it's in everybody's interests to kind of widen the conversation out really across everybody in Essex.
Yeah, sure. And how would a carer hear about you? How do you publicise yourself?
So we obviously go out and about and have lots of posters and leaflets and postcards in GP surgeries and all kinds of things. I mean, most marketing research, and I'm probably drawing on Emma from 24 Fingers here as well, tends to show that people need to see things half a dozen times, don't they, before it actually kind of registers largely. So some of it is about just a blanket approach of going out and trying to put posters and things up. We have obviously got some strong working relationships with people like the Alzheimer's Society or the Stroke Association and other groups where carers might kind of be identified through the person they're looking after. So they will refer to us and we will refer to them. We do get referrals from GPs, but we'd like more. We do get referrals from social workers who see people. We actually get a lot of referrals through the hospitals because we have a support worker in each of the big hospitals like Broomfield, Basildon and Harlow, etc. So we identify a lot of people through inpatients. Clearly that's not a route that's open to us at the moment because people aren't allowed to go and visit anybody in hospitals. So we're kind of working with hospitals to try and see if we can find a better way of identifying families. But yeah, any help that anyone can give us with promotion is always welcome because it's an endless task.
Yeah, sure. Just a reminder to those of you who are watching, if you do have any questions for Veronica, then do feel free to hit the Q&A button and type in your question. Another point just coming up from your presentation that across my mind is that obviously you talked about the interaction between the employer and the employee, and you also mentioned the fact that a lot of people either wouldn't recognise that they're a carer, or if they are a carer, then they may not or may not want to discuss it with their employer. So is there a role for employers to sort of recognise that there might be a carer, even if the employee doesn't actually realise they're a carer? I mean, it's quite a delicate matter because obviously the employer would have to be careful about encroaching on the employee's private life. But would you recommend that employers actually, if they felt that it was relevant, approach an employee and suggest that they might need some carers support?
I think that's a really important question, Colin. It's a really good question. And yes, I think it's about picking up on cues sometimes, isn't it? So if people come in on a Monday morning and regularly say, oh gosh, I've had a really packed weekend, I had to, you know, go across and cut mum's grass, and then I had to go to my uncle's and get all his shopping and do that. So sometimes it's about almost picking up on conversational cues and saying, oh, that you know, that sounds like you're in quite a difficult place at the moment. You know, would you find it helpful to have that conversation, and maybe we could, you know, look at some support for you, whether it's within the organisation or pointing you in a different direction. But as we said, it's difficult because a lot of people clearly feel that they're making themselves look less than committed at work, which is, you know, people's fear, isn't it, that it's going to rebound on them and people will think, well, you know, they're going to come to me and ask if they can change their hours or do this or do that. So I don't want to put myself in the position of being singled out. So, and I suppose that's why it comes back to that culture, whether it's around, you know, family commitments of people with smaller children, whether it's around caring responsibilities. It's about trying to support people holistically and look at it in the round. But it's not easy. I wouldn't pretend it's an easy conversation to have sometimes.
No, I can imagine, yes. And you also talked about carers' rights, and obviously, as you said, it should more be about a conversation rather than what a carer's legal rights are. But presumably if a carer does claim they're a carer, maybe the employer may think, well, actually perhaps they're not really a carer, they're just sort of exaggerating their role. Is there a sort of hard and fast legal definition as to whether the employee is entitled to call himself a carer?
There isn't, interestingly. I mean, and this is why, there were two definitions, I think, at the beginning, one from Essex County Council and one was Carers UK. They were similar, but not the same. For certain areas of caring, then there are some legal definitions. So, for instance, if people are actually claiming carers allowance, which is a benefit from central government in the same way as kind of disability benefits, then there are certain criteria. So people have got to be looking after somebody for 35 hours a week. The person they're looking after has got to be claiming a disability benefit of some kind, and there are certain criteria with that. If they are claiming carers allowance, then they are limited to the amount they can earn from another job. So you have carers who have just a part-time job, but their earnings are capped. So sometimes people find that quite difficult because they're asked to do extra work, or they may be in a role where the shifts are not consistent every week or every month. And that can be really difficult. So you have carers where perhaps they've earned too much one month, and then they actually lose their carers allowance and kind of have to restart the claim process again. So it's a bit of a minefield with things like that. But in general, no, there isn't a legal definition of what constitutes a carer.
Right, so that's quite interesting in terms of the conversations which employers would have, and I guess that's another reason why it's important for the employer to have the conversations with the employee as soon as possible, so that they do avoid any misunderstanding or any sort of friction between the employer and employee. And just to stress, of course, if either the employer or the employee needs advice or help, then you would be a good place to contact.
Absolutely. We're, as I say, we're happy to talk to employers, and we're happy to talk to members of the public and employees. So.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks very much for that, Veronica. I think we've covered everything. Well, certainly enlightened me a lot about what's involved in being a carer, and certainly things like Carers Week are an excellent way of highlighting the number of carers in society. So just to remind those of you who are watching, if you didn't manage to join us at the beginning of the webinar, it is being recorded, so it will be available to view on our YouTube channel later on today, along with all the other Backing Brentwood Business webinars which have been on the YouTube channel now, available for you on Brentwood Chamber of Commerce YouTube channel. These webinars are taking place once a week now, and our next webinar is so next Friday morning, Friday the 19th of June, again at 9:30 AM. And our guest next week will be Martin Weller from FRP Advisory, and he will be talking about the problems associated with your business in terms of if you may be suffering financially during the current crisis, you may need to think about restructuring your business and how to pull through the current crisis. Or unfortunately, of course, it may be that your business is in a position where you do need to think about insolvency. And Martin will be talking about the best ways to handle that, if possible, to avoid that. But if it is an inevitable prospect, then he'll be talking about the best way to go about handling insolvency. So that's next Friday. If you'd like to register for it, please do look out for details on the Brentwood Chamber of Commerce website, or indeed through Brentwood Borough Council. And we will be sending out a mail shot with the link to book on that. So all that remains really is for me to say thank you very much, Veronica, for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you with us today, and hope you enjoy the rest of your Carers Week and it's not too hectic for you. And for those of you who are watching today, just like to say thank you very much for joining us, and wish you all a pleasant weekend. Thank you and goodbye.